Welcome to another edition of Inspired Stories, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes, how they've overcome adversity, and explore current challenges they're facing.
Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Shane Taylor, partner and operator at Krause Auto Group. Founded in 1991 and headquartered in Alpharetta, Georgia, they operate 22 dealerships across South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. They represent over 10 automotive brands and focus on treating customers like members of the Krause family. Whether you're looking for a sporty coupe or a luxury sedan, their simple financing process and commitment to excellent service keep customers returning. Shane has over 30 years of experience in the automotive industry, starting from washing cars and moving up to executive positions in family-run automotive businesses. He has completed online courses from Harvard Business School and NCM Academy, demonstrating a commitment to ongoing learning and leadership. His passion for building effective processes and helping teams succeed makes him a key player at Krause Auto Group, ensuring top-notch service and a supportive environment for both customers and employees. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now back to our guest today, partner at Krause Auto Group, Shane Taylor. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony.
So many people wouldn't realize that you got your start in the automotive world by washing cars. How did those early hands-on experiences shape your leadership style and approach to business today?
Yeah, I don't know that washing cars actually did it, but the path and the journey to where I am now definitely has formed me not only as a businessman, but also just as a human being. So, I think at the time it was just a job, right? In 91, trying to figure things out. I'm 18 years old and just kind of want to get some money in my pocket to do whatever's going on that following weekend. So, it did put me elbow to elbow with some organizations that where I saw what business looked like and what success looked like, and got me kind of chasing that quite a bit.
So take us through a little bit of the journey that got you to where you are today. What were some of the key stops along the way for you?
So in washing cars, again, I always ground myself there. And then from there, it was kind of working in dealerships, seeing guys, and you work elbow to elbow with guys and technicians, what we call lube guys, which are guys changing oil. And I saw there was an opportunity there and quickly jumped into that after a short stint of washing cars and especially in the Northeast where it was cold. So washing cars and working with water wasn't always fun. So jumped into a situation where I started working what we call fixed operations in our business. And that's, again, changing oil filters, stuff like that. I was not very good at it. I'm not the guy that takes things apart and can put them back together very good. And after leaving a couple tires loose on cars and making some major mistakes, they said, well, why don't you seem more like a sales guy? Why don't you sell the service instead of working on the cars itself? So I was gracious there and took that opportunity and learned how fixed operations. I talked about this as a key point because so many leaders in our industry have never had anything to do with fixed operations and really don't have an understanding of it. Most of them are retail oriented guys. But this really kind of gave me a grounding for how it operated in the back from parts and service and working with technicians and selling that service. After
just
doing
to clarify,
that,
fixed operations is what you call the service side of the business.
It is. So that would be everything from writing a car up that comes in with troubles to working on that car. Parts is going to be considered fixed operations as well. So learning just a basic understanding of how that functioned helped me later on in my career dramatically. And then watching, sales guys come through with Rolexes on, was tempted me into that realm where I was a natural talker at that time in my life, and so jumped into sales, and you know, expedited my career really, really quickly in the beginning, becoming a number one sales guy. Probably some faults I had was I thought that I started taking the shortcuts instead of going back to the basics that got me where I was. So after about 90 days of leading a sales board early on in my career, I became to the bottom two or three for probably a 6 month period. Kind of ate some humble pie and figured out that, hey, all these things I was doing the first 90 days was just out of excitement. So kind of getting excited back, reteaching myself how to sell cars, and then spent a long time selling cars. In today's industry, we see that jump happening within 2 3 years. I was closer to about 8 years of what we call pounding pavement, and greeting customers on the lot, walking around, whether it be cold weather or hot weather. So really kind of getting, I have a good understanding of what that entails. I certainly didn't take any easy roads or quick roads to where I am right now. I took every single obstacle and took every mountain that was out there. I climbed the hard way. So shortly after that, I was given an opportunity to go into the finance end, where we finalize paperwork, we sell products in the back from insurances, set up loans for customers. And this was great. I was like a fish in water for the first couple years there, and did really, really well. Um, Again, guys typically will spend, 3 to 4 years in there. I spent closer to 9 years in there, just grinding it out. I was my own worst nemesis, though. I was cocky and very self-serving at that time in my life. So I held myself back by my attitude, and it took years and I was always chasing the next spot. It took me years later to realize that anytime I've ever moved forward in my career, I focused on the task at hand. I had accepted that what I was doing was what I was going to do for the rest of my career. So I accepted that in sales at one time. It's like, well, I'm just going to be the best salesman there is. And shortly after that, I got a finance opportunity. Trying to get out of finance after 3 to 4 years can be really grinding, and what we call in our industry the box, or the finance office. Um, Chasing for the next level, and just couldn't get there. And it wasn't until I said, you know what, I'm going to be a finance guy the rest of my life, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be the best I can at this job. Shortly after I kind of wrapped my head around that, I got an opportunity to get into a store at a leadership level as what we call general sales manager. General sales manager kind of oversees the sales department underneath the general manager. Still chasing the role of a general manager is kind of what I found myself doing again. Finally, one day, kind of sat myself down and said, "Okay, you're going to be the best. This is where you are. This is the best your career is going to get in this position, and you're just going to be the best general sales manager there is." It was within less than a year I was tapped on the shoulder to become a general manager. Now, in our industry, becoming a general manager is like being made in the mafia. So it's a really big deal, and it's you're talking about the top 2 to 3 percentile in our industry over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. So it was super exciting. I did all this under one organization. It was a guy named Tom Cody, just outside the Washington D.C. area, who was primarily in the Ford business. He had some great people under him, a CFO named Mike Cellini, who was teaching me things that I didn't know he was teaching me, and then a great mentor, Greg Basilico, who worked underneath him, was not only a good friend now, but a really good mentor, and gave me some future opportunities as well. Um, and then after, as a general manager, I worked for them for the next couple years, and worked with a friend there. Under a friend. People in our industry or in business in general say that doesn't go along with each other. There's a guy named Steve Rayleigh taught me. He said, "Hey, when you go to work with a friend, that doesn't mean you can see what the least you can do, but it makes you work twice as hard." And I've always used that philosophy, and I've got a lot of friends I work with now, and I teach them that same philosophy, and it works out even better than you'd think. So Working with them for about 20 years. I guess another shift would be that, I ended up leaving them. I was recruited into the Georgia market by a guy named Vernon Krause. Vernon was successful guy, owned, probably at that time, I would say 8 or 9 dealerships, maybe 7 or 8 dealerships at that time. It's back in 2016. And moved down to Georgia. It was a big shift, um, a big change in not only my life. I'm 42 years old. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I thought I was in a company that I was going to be with forever, and we ended up retiring in an area that I actually grew up in Maryland. I learned later in my career that without the pain that comes with change, there's really no growth. So, I look back on that, and this opportunity became really, really big for me. So I was recruited for a Hyundai store in Kennesaw, Georgia. Now, there's a couple of things wrong there. One, it was a new company that I didn't know, but when I did my research on the guy, he had a really big Ford store in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is a well-known area. It's growing like crazy. And I was really familiar with Ford at the time. I've been with Ford majority of my career. So I'm thinking he's calling me, recruiting me. Listen, we'd had over an hour on the conversation. I said, hey, listen, Alpharetta, I have a brother that lives in Alpharetta. I'm familiar with Alpharetta. I'm excited about talking about this Ford opportunity. He said, oh, no, Ford, Alpharetta. No, no, no. I'm talking about a Hyundai store I have in Kennesaw. And I was like, well, you got the wrong guy. Hyundai is not me. And Kennesaw, I've never even heard of Kennesaw, Georgia. So hey, best of luck. Let's pass. So we ended up staying in touch and talking for the next couple months, and then I come down to see the store down in Kennesaw, Georgia. And I guess I talked so much about this because this was a super big ledge for me in my career. And taking over the store could have been the best Mercedes facility in the nation. It was just a beautiful facility he had built. It was in a growing area after I did my research. So it was an okay performing store at the time. I came in, became partner with him fairly quickly. And then within about 8 or 9 months, we were the number one store in Georgia and the surrounding states outside of Florida. And I'll explain why that is later. But uh, did a bunch of work for him. He said, hey, if you can do this in another store. So he had a Ford store down the street, ended up taking over the Ford store. Um, ended up working with the Alpharetta Ford store that I actually was hoping to go and be a part of down there. It's kind of their mothership there. And then
Just a second, Shane.
sure,
Sorry to cut you off. 'Cause there's been so many. I've been furiously writing notes because there's so many good things that I want to dive into. So let's stick a pin in this part of the story. We'll get back to it, but I want to review some of the things that you've talked about so far.
sure.
So you became okay. So you had this background in fixed operations. This helped you a lot later on, and I think we're going to get to that at some point. Um, but then you get an opportunity to go into sales because they said, "Hey, he's not so good at fixing things,
Yeah, right.
but he's got a good personality. Let's put him out front in the customers." How
Sure.
was it that you so quickly became the number one sales guy in those first 90 days? What was it that you were doing that was so effective and different from everybody else?
What happens in our industry is we get too smart for ourselves and we start pre-qualifying customers before they even get out of their car. When they pull up, we start thinking we're good enough to skip steps. So they showed me, hey, here's a roadmap to the sale. And I was just excited to be up front there. I was excited not to be working in the back anymore and grinding out washing cars in 20-degree weather. That I was just and I could wear a tie, every day, and I just got super excited about it. I followed those 10 steps to the T, and was just kind of personable enough where people liked me, and then so it just kind of exploded, and I was very hungry, and I wasn't afraid to work the hours. I would say that was it was just
Just
almost
pure
blind luck, but just
enthusiasm,
kind of following
excitement.
enthusiasm and following the steps of what they showed me. They said to do A, B, and C, and I did A, B, and C. The problem is quickly after that, you start saying, well, maybe if I did B, C, and then D and then skipped A. So that was a real growing experience early in my career to say, no, there's this structure is there for a reason and a purpose. Um, And they didn't do a great job of telling me why in this company for over 20 years. I learned so much of my fundamentals from this company, but wouldn't explain to me. I didn't understand why until later in my career. This is why they did this. And light bulbs started kind of going off. And that's really when my career started accelerating.
Okay, so you did great. You were at the top of the heap very quickly. Then you started looking for some shortcuts, cutting out steps,
Yeah.
partially because you didn't understand the why, and
Yeah.
partially because you're like, hey, maybe I can accelerate this growth even more. And then you quickly came to find out that, okay, you ate a little bit of humble pie because you dropped to the bottom of the heap
Yeah.
now. And so when you went back to following those 10 steps, were you back top of the heap again?
Yeah. I was able to build a business model that was sustainable long term, and not just built on just inertia and excitement. So I really started learning some of the skill sets, and became a student. School was never really my thing. Uh, I became bored very quickly, but I've always been a student in something that I'm interested in and where I study it almost compulsively and try to master it. So I started working on word track constantly, where I was never put into an uncomfortable situation, and a lot of memorizing and a lot of working and a lot of drilling and then became
Did you say
a great
word
sales
track?
guy. Word track, yeah, we train word track. So, when a customer comes in and throws up an objective of some sort, where do you go? So that's a big part of any kind of sales, even outside of car sales. You got to be prepared instead of just kind of looking at them dumbfounded on and not being able to answer their question.
You said something else that was interesting. What was it? You didn't take the easy path. Basically, you found every mountain obstacle along the way. Say more about
Yeah.
that. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, the example of just trying to take shortcuts was my first stint there. And I really became, it was really about chasing the dollar for me in the beginning. I was excited for the fact that, I had buddies that were, a couple years in and were coming out of college and making, not less than a quarter than what I was making as a sales guy. So that became my drive, but it also became short-lived. I spent a good portion of my career trying to separate myself from the bottom, from a financial standpoint, and then also just in title. It wasn't until years later that I realized that closing that gap created better connection with employees, and I could actually do more and be just better at what I do. But those small things became big obstacles for me, and from a general manager looking down at what I was doing, I was very self-serving. Again, I was interested in what benefited me and not trying to help other people.
Mm. So then you got an opportunity to move into the finance side of things, which for me as an outsider seems a little unusual. You've demonstrated the personality and the skill sets to be out in front of customers. Now you're going more to what I'm envisioning is the back office. Is this a normal sort of path for folks to take in the car industry?
It's certainly the healthiest path.
Okay.
There are guys that skip it, and there are very, very few greats that don't have some sort of experience in that office. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of successful car guys in our industry are retail oriented. So you learn that early on as in selling cars. We call the sales part, it's like we call the back end fixed operations. We call the front part variable operations. So majority of the leaders that come into our industry have come from just the variable side. So you learn the retail end. The problem on the retail end is you can run pretty sloppy and be successful. What the finance office does is it creates detail in your life. So, you know, looking back, as miserable as I was probably the last 4 years in that finance office, the skill set that I learned on how to slow down, organize things, build relationship with other banks that I could get things, I could get paper hung or bought, what we call, that other guys couldn't, became invaluable later in my career, in making stores successful.
And why were you able to get paper hung or bought? more than other people.
Relationships. It was all about relationships, which, in that part of my career, I started just tipping the iceberg of understanding what relationships really meant in our industry. And now it's everything. So everything I do is trying to build relationships and strengthen those relationships. At some point or another, those relationships can be super beneficial to you. But that's not the only reason to do it, but that's a major reason.
So, in the parts of your story that we've heard so far, there's certainly repeating themes here, right? Shane, you were chasing money, you were chasing titles, you were chasing what was good for you, and in your words, that kind of turned you into your own worst enemy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And there were realizations along the way, it sounds like, where you were like, man, well, I'm here, I'm in this spot, I'm in this role. I am just going to buckle down and make the decision that I am going to be the best at this that I possibly can. And it
Yeah.
seems like, in the instances we've heard so far, it seems like once you did that, the new opportunity, the new door opened pretty quickly afterwards.
Yeah, it did. It did. And that trend still happens today. So yeah, it's really about focusing what's in front of you, what's on your plate, and just being the best you can at what's in the tasks that are in front of you at that time. I think to propel in anybody's career.
Okay, so now let's skip forward to kind of where we left off before. There was an opportunity down in Kennesaw, Georgia, a place you'd never heard of before, with
Sure.
Hyundai, which I'm not a Hyundai guy, I'm a Ford guy. So you're like, nah, I'm going to pass. But
Yeah.
something kind of brought you back to it. You went down, you checked out this beautiful dealership, and you're like, all right, let's do this. You became a partner. And how was it that you quickly became, what did you say, the number one store in the state?
Number one Hyundai store in the state and the surrounding states outside of Florida. So every state that surrounded Georgia, we were the number one Hyundai store there.
What were you doing differently?
Volume wise.
Yeah.
Everything that I had learned in my previous group, it become almost mechanical, and I plugged in all those same practices. I did have some things open up. So Vernon was big on education, and he always has been. They are a part of a institute called NCM, and they are out of Kansas City, Missouri, and they're strictly automobile schooling for every aspect. So within 3 to 4 months, he sent me to NCM schooling, where I accomplished, financial management and understanding 1 and 2, general manager 1 and 2. I did service, more fixed operation classes. I spent a good portion of my first year traveling out to Kansas for 3 to 4 day stints on trying to understand it. When this happened, a big light bulb went off. They use what they call a composite, where they dissect every single penny that goes through the dealership, from a sales standpoint to how it converts to a growth standpoint, and your expenses thereafter. This was all new to me. And I started understanding through these numbers why the group I was with were doing certain things that they did, and kind of shed light. And then when I had a better understanding of it, I became a better operator, and I could teach people. I've always enjoyed instruction and training and that classroom setting. I feel like it's probably one of my gifts, is being able just to communicate well with especially variable or sales guys. So I was able to implement that, and then with the work ethics that I had learned, through my 20-year career with the Cody organization, plugging that in, getting an arsenal of understanding the numbers in depth. Now all of a sudden I was becoming not only a good retail guy, but I was also starting to become a good businessman as well. And that's what I attribute really our success in that store was. And then quickly after that, within about a year, I understood. I'd never had a store that I couldn't really figure out within 12 to 16 months. I've been plugged into a few different stores and could usually turn it around definitely within a year and a half, but most of the time inside a year. Just plugging in things that I had been trained over the last 20 years. So I could almost get bored after a year in a single store. So I think Vernon sensed that a little bit and started plugging me into other stores very quickly where I'd implement the same things I did in the Hyundai store. I started implementing in the Ford store and helping the organization grow at the same time.
And so does that bring us to present day?
That does not bring us to present day. No. Um, Full circle there. An interesting part of the story outside of business is that Vernon had an amazing daughter named Jennifer Krause that I met in my stint in Georgia, fell in love with, and started having a pretty serious relationship with, which um, put a little strain on Vernon and I's relationship, respectfully. Um, we During that strain, I had a group called Morgan Auto Group, which is based out of Florida. Morgan is the second largest private auto group in the nation. Um, and they kind of saw some of the things that were happening in Georgia and they started trying to recruit me to come down and be an executive for their group. They were they were growing fairly quickly. I think at that time they had 34 stores. Um, and Jennifer and I felt like it was kind of best at that time to separate from the Krause Auto Group. So sat Vernon down and just kind of explained everything and left everything right. We'd always talked about potentially getting back together, but at that moment, it was a good opportunity. Florida has always been the ideal destination for me. It's the mecca in the car business. It's You'll see some of the largest stores in the nation coming out of Florida. They don't put the dealerships very close to each other, so you're serving a larger demographic area. And the weather's awesome, right? And the golf is good. So, and fishing. So, and those are my other two hobbies when I'm not working. So, being in Florida was always an opportunity. Larry Morgan and their COO Tom Moore, after long talks, Jennifer and I decided to move to Florida. We got married in Florida, and then so I started kind of going to family functions with Vernon, and we became more than just business associates. We really became friends. He became my father-in-law. He's a mentor of mine, and we stayed and we grew. Our relationship really blossomed over the next 3 years. He happens to live in Jupiter, Florida, a mile away from where I was too, so we saw each other frequently. I bring this up because it was an important part of my personal life that affected my career in a positive manner, long run. You know what I learned in Morgan was invaluable. Larry Morgan is he's an amazing guy, and he's got a really, really good people around him. He only had, I think at that time, 3 or 4 executives at 30 some stores and all of his model is all in Florida. So to be a part of that, really stretched and pushed. You want to talk about going above and beyond and outside of my thresholds and comfort zones. That was probably one of my biggest steps there, that I found that I could do things that I had no idea that I could do when applied properly. Um, so after about 3 years of that, I realized that I wanted to get back into a little bit smaller setting. I was managing, and with Morgan, I was managing uh, 12 stores that realmed from Claremont, Florida, which is just north of Orlando, all the way down the East Coast, all the way to South Miami. So I stayed on the road a lot. Um, and the expectations with that company are large. What was really cool was probably something that we may never see in our industry again. So as a private dealer in this market, he took that from 34. I believe the number was 34 at that time. And when I exited, he had 75 dealerships.
Wow.
This is massive. I mean, we'll probably never see that growth spurt in a private company ever again in the history of the car industry. And I happen to be an executive to be front row on this thing and be a part of it.
What was happening that was able to fuel that kind of rapid growth?
Um, I think it was always his vision. From a financial standpoint, he did some syndicate loans through an outside company where he had availability of some funds. But his vision really, and just growing and becoming bigger and better, was something that I learned. I mean, Larry's over 80 years old and will outwork most 30-year-olds that I know have ever met. And his right hand of his son is a CEO, and Tom Moore is a COO, and became a friend of mine, and just a phenomenal guy that I have the utmost respect for, and mentored me over those 3 years. And what I learned in those 3 years was probably bigger than any 10-year stint I learned in the automobile industry.
So at some point along the way, you began, I'm going to assume, you began to realize that Shane chasing the money, chasing the title, that's not really the way to go about this. Maybe I should take a different approach. When did the light bulbs start to go off there, and what did that transition look like for you?
So yeah, I heard a phrase one time that said, "If you only worry about being rich, you'll never be rich." That because the bar always moves up, so you never accomplish it. Um, I made really, really, really good money with the Morgan Auto Group. It's one thing they do is they take care of their people. Um, but at the end, I felt like there was something that I wanted to do above and beyond that. I've embraced schooling in specific areas that really excite me, like I mentioned earlier. I went through a year college. It's an accredited course called Spiritual Leadership College. Um, and this was eye-opening for me in the sense that it got me in contact with kind of a spiritual path that I was starting to go down, but from a leadership standpoint, and then the impact that I can make on other people's lives. So my wife did it with me. Jen and I did this course over a year. It was in person. It was not an online course, and it was a lot of memorizing, a lot of studying, and a lot of reading, that really kind of formed what we wanted to do to help impact other people's lives. So we kind of came up with a model that we wanted to help impact people's lives, not only from a financial standpoint, but a spiritual standpoint, and help them experience some of the freedoms that we were experiencing through our spirituality. And that's through God. And then as this idea formed about that time, I believe God put an opportunity in front of me with Vernon to buy a couple stores with him, buy one store in a store that he was already a part of. He allowed me to buy into that store in the Venice, Florida market. And that's kind of been our model. We started that in December 11th of last year, so just over a year. And our goal again is to really kind of change some of the negative traditions that are going on in the automobile industry. Also to really make a difference in people's lives in a positive way, in a spiritual way as well. So we spend a lot of time just kind of witnessing and helping people that are in need.
Say more about your goal being to change some of the negative habits that go on in the car industry. What are those? How do you want to shift them?
Yeah, we've all seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street, right? So, there was a real correlation in some of the things that were going in those bullpens that are happening on showrooms when customers weren't around. A lot of bullying, a lot of talking down to people, a lot of just things that are overall kind of negative, and a way to do business that's not real healthy for the customer. So we kind of set that aside and said, hey, let's talk about what the customer's needs are. Let's work on a more transparent way to do business with customers that are a little non-traditional from the car business as a whole. And then let's make our legacy how that we can positively impact these people. Again, not just financially, but in a spiritual manner.
So what did that transition look like? Because you've got folks in the team that are accustomed to operating a certain way, and you want to come in and teach them a new way. Not everybody's receptive to change. Was there a lot of turnover that took place during this transition?
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of turnover, which is one thing that we work hard on not doing is turnover, because you lose a little traction every time that you have turnover in your business. But we did have a hard time finding people that have the intensity on the business side. So as soft as what we're talking about, our drive and intensity was furious. It was move at quick pace, but understand. And we had, this was we were investing a lot of our own monies in this, majority of our portfolio. So we had that stress on top of it as well. But we believed in it. So we had budgets set out for ourselves that we said, not hitting these marks are not going to work. So finding the right people that were willing to do that, was definitely tough. So yeah, we had a lot of turnover, across the stores, over this last year. We have stabilized that in the fourth quarter. We have great people working for us right now, great leaders in place, and the culture as a whole is really turning to where what we want in a store atmosphere.
Shane, I'm kind of curious to hear from folks who were part of, we'll call it the old guard, that did successfully make the transition to the new way of doing business. What can you say about how those folks evolved, or what was helpful in kind of coaching them into a new way of doing business?
I think kind of letting them know where we come from a moral standpoint and what we wanted for our, not only our customers but the employees that fell under that management. We really try to edify our people, lift our people up, and make them better and get behind them. Servantry leadership is, something that we focus very, very high on. And in this industry, as it did for me, and I explained over my first 20 years, your head gets a little bit big. It's hard to be a servant when your chest is puffed out and you're full of pride. When you have big successes in here, that happens a lot. So just getting behind our people, and teaching the culture of being a servant for them. You work for them; they don't work for you. That was probably the biggest keynote there. And I'll mention too that even with the turnover, there's not a person that I don't stay in touch with that didn't work out for us in our particular situation. There were some really, really good people there that I still stay in contact with. There's a couple general managers that ended up, parting company with, and one left and one we left, departed with, but are just really, really good people. I think at the end of the day, they would say that it was overall a good experience, even though it didn't work out for everyone. I would think that they would say that they learned something about servantry leadership, at the end of the day.
Where can, for people listening to this who their ears are kind of perked up about servantry leadership, where would be a good place for folks to start to learn more about that?
The example of Jesus in the New Testament is the best example that we have of servantry leadership. Here's the best leader, best coach, best mentor in the entire world ever, and he always took the back road or the second row, when it came to getting behind his people, and was always humble. So, I've got several of the mentors that I've mentioned, do similar things, and have taken those roads and showed me what that looks like for me to be able to define it for myself. But yeah, that's where I'd say, if I had to bring two guys up that are big in our industry, there's Andy Elliott, who's just on fire for life and specializes in the auto industry. And this guy is, he's ripped to the core, and he's just go. And then, another one of my big mentors is John Maxwell. So if I had to say, I come into a split with an Andy Elliott and a John Maxwell, which are complete opposites of the spectrum, with a similar message, that kind of help me, communicate with my guys and what our needs are and the direction that we want to go. But culture ultimately is something that you build, and it doesn't happen overnight. And we're slowly building the culture that we had a vision for over a year ago now.
So you wanted to change some of the negative habits in the car industry, but the other thing you said is that you also wanted to help people spiritually as well.
Yeah.
What does that look like in a work environment?
Well, in an environment where you try to get every penny that's on the table, sometimes it goes into a gray area, where people, anytime you introduce money into a situation, especially in sales and commission type businesses, it gets really murky sometimes about what's right and what's right for the customer and what's morally right. So we really try to push about, we spend thousands of dollars on our customers after the sale to do what's right. When your salespeople start seeing that and really understanding that, it gives them a confidence and a step to kind of do better business. And that's how we built this culture, is just by doing the right thing every single time, and letting that bleed down through our leaders.
Say more about what it meant or what it means on an ongoing basis to spend a lot of money on customers on sort of the back end. What is that?
So, a customer comes in, they say, hey, there's a scratch here. It could be an interior situation. It could be hey, something's not running right with my car. We're going to embrace that instead of run from it. So we take that customer and we make that situation right, whatever that looks like, whether it be something on a financial contract, whether it be a physical situation on the car, whether it be a used car that was an as is, we're still going to get behind that car or that product, and we're going to make that situation right. We do it every time. Or if a customer even had a perception, oftentimes the process gets so rushed that customers don't even realize what they're signing, and then they come out, and then the excitement wears off. And I want to take that customer, I want to sit them back down, and if we can't see eye to eye, then we're just going to make it right. We're going to either take that car back, or we're going to say, hey, this is how you understood it. This is what we're going to do. And if they don't feel good about it, the car deal's not worth it to me. I would rather not have the sale. And that's different in our industry,
Yeah.
from where most practices, I think, stand from.
What are we talking about? 20-some dealerships now?
I think 26 is what Krause Auto Group is up right now. My interests lie only in Florida and only in the Venice market. We've got some Florida stores down in Fort Myers, Cape Coral. There's a partner down there, Mike Spinazzi, is a major partner with Vernon, and he does a phenomenal job in business down there. Mine is kind of this smaller bubble right here in Venice. But we've got some good things on the horizon, looking to expand.
So the reason I asked is I'm curious how you teach that different style of thinking, across multiple people, multiple physical locations, because it's one thing if you've got a policy that's sort of black and white, right? We sell this car as is. That's what the contract said. The customer comes back and they complain. It's like, sorry, hey, and you've got this internal policy. It's black and white. But the policy that you're describing, there's a lot more gray there. There's a lot more flexibility and wiggle room. And so I'm just kind of curious, what's the guidance that you give people who are sitting in that seat across from the customer so that they're making a decision that aligns with both your moral values as well as your financial values?
Yeah, there's definitely a training period that goes on there. I would answer this in two parts. One, when you manage from a platform, which I'm not doing as much right now, but whether it's been through Krause in the Atlanta region or with Morgan in a large section of Florida, the start to change that culture comes from servantry leadership. So when you are dealing with leaders from a platform level, my biggest stress every morning after I did my Bible reading and my run and got in after my routine in the morning, I really worked on getting ideas to bring something to them. When they're convinced that the idea is theirs and they implement it, that's when you have a win. But it starts there, because when you are managing leaders that way, then those leaders starts tailing off, and they start understanding what they need to do for not only their employees, but also their customers. It just bleeds all the way through. We have a button on our websites, Justin, Jen and I's stores here in Venice, that says "Talk to the owner," and that button allows customers to kind of directly communicate with us. So when they communicate with us, it's usually because something didn't go their way or they're not getting what they want. So that's a training. Every one of those is a training experience. We'll pick up the phone, talk to the general manager, say, hey, listen, what happened here? Say, hey, listen, this this doesn't make sense. Well, I understand. We've got to see a bigger picture here. How many people is that guy going to go talk to? He's going to bleed into here. And how does that contradict the money that we're spending in marketing right now? So word of mouth, when you start doing that word of mouth very quickly, I think we've just been nominated for uh, uh, business of the year in the Venice market. We're supposed to find out who actually won here in the next week, but it's really just kind of through doing that and, hey, doing the right thing. So it starts with a culture of servantry leadership to your people, bringing them ideas, serving them. When they know that they're being served by somebody that's over them, they start serving the people that's under them. That bleeds through all the way through our customers, and then just doing the right thing. So, every scenario, this is a weird industry where there's no textbook for it, right? Like there's no book you can read and go in and run a car dealership. I tell guys all the time, the only difference between you and I are about 2,000 mistakes. It is a business of mistakes. You have to live it. I mean, as a general manager and operator, you're not only managing, all kind of different personalities, because in the sales world, you've got, alphas all over the place, but you have, some introverts as well. You're an HR manager, you're an accountant, you're a recruiter. You have to be multitasked all day, every day, and there's no textbook for that. So you kind of learn as you go, unfortunately, in this business. So if you can put big enough bumpers down the bowling alley rails and kind of keep them within a certain thing and teach the culture of servantry, that's the only way to make this thing bleed all the way down through our customers.
You mentioned having to wear multiple hats, one of them being a recruiter. And a lot of folks I talk to in business leadership positions, it's still a pretty tight labor market. I'm curious what you have tried and found some success with on the recruiting side, and maybe as well as on the retention side, which can be just as important.
This is probably something I learned from a guy, Tom Moore, the COO over at Morgan Auto Group. When he had a position that needed to be filled, within 5 minutes, he could have 2 to 3 people on the phone for that position. So no matter how great or how small the position was, he would call that person. He would have an hour-long conversation with them, just talk to them about who they were. And if he liked you, he would actually put reminders on his calendar to have 5-minute conversations just to stay in touch with them. Now, this is a guy that worked near 80 to 90 hours a week, but he probably spent 20 hours in a work week just touching base. Now he's running 75 stores, so he's got cannonballs flying at him 24/7. But he slowed down enough to build relationships with guys, and they loved him, man. And they would wear his phone out. His phone was nonstop. Hey, how are you? You got a spot for me yet? You got a spot for me yet? It didn't matter if it was a technician, a porter, a general manager, a salesperson. And I use that to the T, where I just slow down, go through every application. I review them myself personally. I pick the phone up, have general conversations with them, asterisk the ones I like, and just try to stay in touch with those people via text or whatever. And it's been beneficial and we are so reactionary in this business because it moves at such a fast pace that, the standard in our industry is, oh, this guy just quit, or oh, this guy just left, and what are we going to do? And so now we scramble. So trying to teach my guys the same philosophy is for success is something that we're trying to implement as well.
You mentioned something about your morning routine. What does that consist of? What time are you getting up?
So 4:30ish, I get up. I start immediately with just God's word for me. If I don't start that way, the day just seems just off tilter just a little bit. So I spend an hour and a half there, depending on how I'm led that morning. Some prayer, and then I get into a 3 to 5 mile jog, where I kind of feel clear headed at that point, and then I'm ready to kind of start my day. I spoke recently in front of a bunch of young athletes, and I'm a big believer in what I call the pre-shot routine. If you're a golfer, all golfers have what they call pre-shot routine, where slow down before every shot. They get their breathing in line, trying to get their heart rate in line. There's a series of mechanical movements that they'll repeat every single time so they can perform the shot exactly the same way. And that's what I call my pre-shot routine is, Bible run and then work. So it allows me kind of to get my breathing right, get my heart right, get my head right, and then I'm able to attack the day more consistently, just like those golfers try to do before every shot.
You said you spend 60 to 90 minutes with God's Word. What does that
Yeah.
mean? You're opening up the Bible and kind of seeing what pops up?
I used to do that pretty regularly. Now I've got a good friend and mentor, Frank, that taught me a series called the Great Eight. The Great Eight is basically 8 markers all the way through the Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation. It's split into 8 different sections. Um, I'm a car guy, so my attention span's pretty small. To go through some of that Old Testament and just try to pound it out, I don't have the tolerance for it. But what the Grade Eight does, it splits it up and it kind of looks at more stories. And it's strategically kind of spread out through the Bible where I kind of get more of a flow. So I do the Grade Eight every single morning.
And this is just on repeat. And so
Yeah, it's on repeat. So
does it
yeah,
get
I'm
sort of
on.
repetitive? You're just sort of reading the same things over and over again?
Yeah, that's the cool thing about God's word is that, depending on what state of mind or what you're asking for or where your head is that morning, you can read the same exact scripture and get completely something different for it. I believe that they call it God's word for a reason because that's how he speaks to us, right? So the Spirit kind of gives me some direction on that flow and kind of enlightens me. I used to spend majority of my time in reading like automotive news or Auto Trader or uh, uh, the current news via internet on what's going on in my market. And I found that if I replaced a good portion of that with just reading God's word, that those answers were provided for me, and I was enlightened, and even in my business world through those routines. So it's a really big portion. I now spend probably 20% of my reading time
Wow.
scanning some recent automotive news that may be relevant for me right now.
I mean, for a really busy guy like you, Shane, you have multiple dealerships, lots of folks reporting to you. We haven't gotten to your growth plans yet. We're going to talk about those soon. Dedicating 60 to 90 minutes out of every day to reading the Bible, obviously it's important to you. Um, I have to imagine it's hard to find the time, but can you maybe put into, I don't know, a little bit more concrete example of how you have found this so beneficial? Maybe there's even a specific story that can kind of help enlighten why this is so important and so impactful for you.
Well, I'll address first the timeline. I used to get up at 7 to do that, but then found myself rushed. So then I started getting up at 6 to do it, and then I didn't feel like I was able to get everything that I needed out of it too. So it slowly crept up to a 4:30 time. That specifically is God's time for me in my life. So, you know, I believe God's leading my life. So, what scripture does for me in not only my personal life, but I believe the scripture is relevant today as it was then. So there's example over example. I mean, I'm reading right now in First Samuel about King David, one of the greatest Israelite kings ever, and the example that he gave of servantry leadership to his people, no matter how they crossed him, I think is as relevant today as it was then. So, I serve a God that was God then and through all that time period, and the same one now. So, where people look back at it as just history, for me, it's as relevant as it is today as it was then.
Can you maybe share a particular anecdote, a story of, I mean, you say, you believe God is leading your life. What's maybe something particularly impactful that might be interesting for listeners to hear about?
You mean a story in the Bible that would be impactful there, or?
It's maybe an example of you reading the Bible at a particular time in your life, and there was a message there that was just what you needed to hear, and here was kind of how you put it into action?
I'd say that, one that, I mean, there's hundreds of them, but, you know, it's easy in the business world to forget what your focus are and what your real drive is, and even get sometimes foggy with your relationship with God, even though it's the most important thing in my life. You know, there was a story of Peter on a boat, and there was a storm kind of going on, and this is a story where Jesus walks water, right? And he tells him to come out of the boat, and Peter steps out, and he's looking at God, he's focusing on Jesus, and then he takes his eyes off because he's looking at the storm around him, and he starts to sink, and then Jesus grabs him and pulls him up. And to me, I find myself being Peter all the time, like, right? Like my intent is to draw closer to God or draw closer to Jesus. And oftentimes the storm around me kind of distracts me in a way where I take my eyes off that, and I find myself sinking, or I find myself in a panic or feeling of fear. There's a great scripture out there that says, God did not give us a spirit of fear or timidity, but of love, power, and self-control. So, that scripture kind of gets my focus back on Jesus when the storm is kind of going crazy on around me, and allows me to do things better and do it right. So those are things that, through reading scripture that allow me to give me encouragement and refocus me in times of need.
So let's talk about what the future looks like for you
Sure.
and Krause. What are some of the plans that are in place?
So the long-term goal in the agreement that I went into with Vernon was to be able to buy him all the way out in the stores that I'm involved with. That'll happen over a little bit of time. Um, but Jen and I are working on growing our own business, and we have some other stores in sight right now that'll be really, really, I can't go into detail on, but are really, really big opportunities in the Florida market. And then to build something for our children. We have 3 children, and part of our legacy and our end goal is for them to get involved. They're in the business now, kind of cutting their own teeth in Krause stores in Atlanta, but our dream is for them to be involved in what we're building in the Florida market, separate from Atlanta.
Okay, so let's shift gears here for a moment, Shane, and let's talk about
Chase. His name's Chase. Sorry.
It's all right. Yeah, we'll make it look good.
All right.
Let's shift gears for a moment, Shane, and I want to talk about maybe a serious challenge that you've overcome, either personal or professional. What that was like going through it, and maybe some lessons that you learned coming out the other side.
We talked about earlier that, change can often be painful. Without that change, there is no growth. So every time there's been the major obstacles that I talked about in leaving the Cody organization, leaving the Krause organization, and even leaving the Morgan organization, there's a small part of every time I left there, I felt like there was some failure. Fortunately, every single one of those moves have been major stepping stones for my career. So just embracing that change, failure comes almost daily when you look back on the day and you see that you could have done something differently, you could have done something better. But my goal is to constantly look forward, not back there. But mistakes, gosh, I mean, again, I've got a 30-year-old general manager at one of my stores right now, and he's just cutting his teeth, and he's going to be a great guy one day. And the biggest difference between him and I when we sit across the desk is, again, a couple thousand mistakes. So full of mistakes. If you want me to get specific, I probably could. But your day is full of them in this industry because, again, there's no book, there's no outline to exactly how this plays out or how it works.
Is there maybe a specific story that you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, when I left the Cody organization, it was mutual. I I struggled with my ego and how I spoke with people. Um, it's completely opposite of how I conduct business now or how I communicate with my staff. Is before I realized that edifying them was better than talking down to them. I was kind of still old school at that time. Um, and I had several HR complaints about the way that I talked to the employees. And, you know, I was coming from a place of what I felt was passion. I've always thought that passion supersedes skill set. But the problem, if you haven't disciplined yourself or don't have the control or don't really even have God in your life, when it's all passion, you just kind of leave a disaster behind you. And I was starting to do that as a general manager and early in that part of my career where, people complained. People didn't like how I interacted with them. And I took it very personal. Um, and set out on a road when I moved to Georgia to kind of change the way that I was going to do that. It was like a fresh start and a fresh beginning. It was a painful change. It was an area that I grew up in. I knew everybody. I had a long list of customers that just come see me and just deal with me. And I had to separate my pride. It was interfering how I communicated with my people, and it showed. And that was a really really tough lesson. So through again several mistakes, understanding where I wanted to go and as far as lifting people up and helping change people for the better, I had some major changes I had to do to come out the other side of that, and it almost ended my career, as from my own standpoint, because I thought, gosh, I'm pouring out everything I have here. I just needed to figure out a different way to do it, and that was a real real painful experience for me.
It's commendable because, a lot of people, faced with a situation like that, you're doing, in so many aspects of your career, you're doing really well. And you are just putting everything that you have into it, and you think that you're doing the right things. And then to have, several people come and tell you, man, you are off the mark. Like, this is not working. Your approach here is not okay. Most people, in my experience, faced with that would get very defensive.
Yeah,
Problem's not me. It's all you guys. You're not
yeah.
keeping up. You're not, pulling your weight here. Um, to be able to be reflective in the way that you were and check yourself and say, man, I need to come up with some new ways. It's not something everybody would do. What do you think it was about you or about that time that made you ultimately so receptive to that feedback?
That was ingrained in me from as a child. My dad was all about accountability. So anytime that something went wrong, he would sit me down and he would either have me write or open discuss, and it was a long discussion on how we do things differently. He would tell me, he said, you don't do anything you don't want to do. You say, hey, listen, I don't want to do this, but you're going to find yourself doing it because you don't do anything you don't want to do. That message brought an accountability on myself of, hey, listen, there's always something different I can do. That's something that, I actually have notes on that to talk about that because it's been big in my career. So anytime anything's ever gone wrong, leaving pride a little bit on the shelf in that manner and trying to find a better solution has been something it's always been ingrained in me. And doing better, you know, knowing that there's something left in the tank every single time and pushing yourself to the next level.
How important is community involvement to you and Krause?
It's big when you're talking about location. If you're talking about locations and where we do business, our involvement very quickly with local newspapers and local police and hospitals has been something in part of our outreach program. It also builds that culture that we talk about and becoming not just about us, but also giving. Um, Giving is a big part of our culture as well, and trying to figure out different ways to help other people and give, whether it be financial needs or just advice. So, that bleeds in, what we've been talking about all along, bleeds into our community, um, which draws people to us, and we're being recognized uh, by that right now, actually.
Shane, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I'm curious, what is something fun or interesting about you that we haven't already shared and our listeners don't know about?
Gosh, we've covered a lot today.
Any
I think,
particular hobbies, passions, anything in your past that was particularly unique?
I love to golf and fish. If I'm not trying to figure out how to sell more cars, I'm slapping it around on a golf course somewhere if I have time, or fishing. I'm not really good at either one of them because I just don't have the time. But those are a couple things that I'd say that, our children are very important to us. And we have them in mind with every step we take up the mountain that we're on now, that we've been over many times before.
That's terrific. Shane, I've just got one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to do two things. Everyone listening today, I know that you love today's content. Please hit the like, share, or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Shane, I also want to let people know the best way to get in touch with you. What's that?
You can. My phone's always open. I don't hide the phone number. I can share that with you. Three zero
If you're
one
comfortable.
301-752-6638. And then my email address is staylor@krauseauto.com, krause.com. And I'm always open to communicate with people, and love making new relationships.
That's terrific. So, last question for you, Shane. I'm curious, what do you see the big changes coming to the car industry in the next couple of years?
Gosh, EV is probably electric vehicles is probably something that's, it's been being chewed on over and over and over again. There's a little bit of a battle between, we don't really have the infrastructure to implement the electric vehicles that we thought we were going to 3 to 4 years ago. Um, the dealer body has kind of spoken up over the last year and a half, where you've seen some little less talk of EV, and probably more about hybrid. But running better, cleaner cars, is probably the biggest change that we're going to see in our industry. There's a lot of platforms out there right now with online buying. We encourage it, but I don't, in my lifetime, see it changing. People still want to come in, look somebody in the eye. Customers still want to negotiate, as easy as we try to make it, in most situations. Um, but I'd say between that and, you know, AI is quickly changing our industry as well, from how we describe things online to how even sometimes we're interacting with customers. So the two biggest changes I'm probably the most resistant on, and that I bring up, but they are heavy topics, and you have to have some self-awareness about them for sure.
Let's pull on each of those threads that you brought up for a second, because I'm curious to get more of your perspective. Right, EV. Man, it seems like it was not that long ago we were hearing that uh, you know several countries were making rules where they're going to completely phase out gas powered engines by year such and such. Um, Auto manufacturers were making big pushes towards electric vehicles. Seemed like it was the right thing to do, good for the environment, more opportunities to uh, power the cars with renewable energy. And you're a car guy, so you've got better perspective on this than I do. But the articles I'm reading now is that people are really pulling back on that. Part of it is the lack of the infrastructure. The cars are more expensive than gas powered cars, at least for now. How do you see this unfolding in the next several years? What do
So
you think?
what stemmed that was the government really putting a lot of money on the line for the OEMs and other manufacturers to go EV, and there was so much money that they were forcing the hand of the dealers, saying, "Hey, listen, to be compliant, right? Every OEM has a circle of what they call compliancy, whether it be building, or maybe EV in this situation that we're talking about now." And they were telling the OEMs, "Hey, listen, you've got to have this oh, you got to have these charging stations, and it was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to put this in. Well, what we found is while some guys are starting to put it in, that when we had to contact the electric company to figure out what that was going to look like, a lot of electric companies were saying, hey, listen, we can't power that, and we don't even know when we can power that. So we're having these OEMs tell us as dealers, look, you have to spend this money in order to get X amount of monies back, right? Is really what we live on. There's no margin in the actual car itself anymore. It's just kind of what we get back from OEMs is primarily that money. So the dealer body about a year and a half ago really went to DC and lobbied on this, and we made the voice was really heard. We did a really good job as a dealer body saying, hey, listen, hold on, we're not ready for us to make them spend this money. We got to slow it down on this EV talk. So it's not out, but that's what created that slowdown. And then when you look at the benefits of hybrid versus the EV, there's just so many more benefits in my opinion. I'm still a little bit maybe old school in that thinking. But I think that's hydrogen's another conversation that's on the cusp of the future. We're not doing ourself any favors to our planet by what we're doing to sustain these EV batteries. So looking for a healthier manner, we're definitely moving in that direction, some form or fashion. EV talk slowed down, and that's why it slowed down over the last year. But we're on the cusp of doing something cleaner for sure. We just gotta allow everybody to swallow that pill slowly.
AI is the other one I want to talk about real quick. How are you guys using it now, and what do you think you might be doing with it a year or two from now?
When we look at one thing that's very time consuming for us is putting descriptions online for every single car. So if you've got 300 cars on the ground, you've got to do a description on every one of them. AI has got some really cool tools out there that kind of save us tons of time. Where I'm starting to see it, we've been interviewing some companies. We have what we call business development centers or BDC centers inside stores. So typically when a customer calls in or does an internet inquiry about a car, we have got a person that's live, and they respond back, or they'll pick up the phone and have conversations with them. That's still kind of a practice that we're using right now. I'm watching some guys in our industry right now go to AI companies. They don't have the overhead of personnel, and these AI companies are getting really, really good at responding in a more natural way to the clients. So haven't fully bought into that. Talking to several people right now, but I still, my stores are at a smaller point as of right now, where I still think we can give that personal engagement, all the way through with good training. It's going to supersede. It's going to beat that AI tool. But that's a big conversation when you look at stores that are selling, 6, 7, 800 cars a month. Those business development centers sometimes are 25, 30, 35 people.
Wow.
You look at that on an hourly rate, and then insurance on top of that. I mean, the AI tool is less than a tenth of what you're going to spend. It's really affordable. So for those guys, it's super attractive.
Yeah, I could see that. It's going to be interesting to follow how that's all unfolds.
It is.
So Shane, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Anthony, you're great, man. Thank you so much. I enjoy watching your podcast.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.